I'm Adam.
And I'm Acorn.
And this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way. Hey Acorn, how do you feel about equality?
I just don't get what all the fuss is about.
Equality is an important concept. It's about treating everyone fairly and giving everyone the same opportunities.
I'm all for fairness, but let's be real. Some pigs are just born with a natural talent for loving hot sauce. Shouldn't we embrace our unique abilities instead of striving for equality in everything?
That's an interesting way to look at it. While embracing our unique talents and passions is important, equality doesn't mean we all have to be the same. It means that everyone should have the same opportunities and rights regardless of their differences.
So you mean that if I love hot sauce and someone else loves salsa, we should both have the same right to enjoy our condiments without judgment?
Exactly. Whether it's hot sauce or salsa, everyone should be able to enjoy what they love without discrimination. In today's book, An Unflinching and Inspiring History of Voting Rights looks back at the activists who answered equality's call, working tirelessly to secure the right for all to vote. But it also looks forward to the future and the work that still needs to be done. Let's get started. Equality's Call: The Story of Voting Rights in America, written by Deborah Diesen, illustrated by Magdalena Mora. In 1776, the founders of the United States of America declared that consent of the governed would be a key component of our country. The founders didn't always agree on everything, but they did all believe that the power of our government should come from the will of the people and that citizens would express their choices by voting in elections. But at that time, only some people were allowed to vote. Citizenship, the legal status of being a member of a country, and the right to vote, sometimes called the franchise, political franchise, or suffrage, were not available to all. As our nation grew, our understanding of democracy and rights grew too. Many people stood up and spoke about abolition, the end of slavery, about citizenship, about enfranchisement, and about civil rights, equal opportunity for all. They also worked to end voter suppression, the practice of discouraging or preventing people from voting. They heard equality's call. Our founders declared when our country began that consent in the governed was part of the plan. Through voting, elections, and representation, the voice of the people would strengthen our nation. In fact, though, for years, this great founding ideal was extended to some, and for others not real.
You know, I'd make an excellent candidate for the hot sauce party. I mean, who wouldn't want a pig with my confidence and a taste for spice in office?
You certainly have the confidence part down, but I think there might be a few qualifications you need to meet for a political position.
Well, I did teach those little piglets in the barn a thing or two about farm life. Maybe I should run for barnyard mayor.
I'm not sure if the residents of the barnyard are eligible voters.
I have to admit, my foreign policy experience is a bit limited. My diplomatic skills mostly involve sharing my hot sauce with the other animals.
Sharing is a valuable trait, but I think we should leave the hot sauce diplomacy to you and focus on encouraging people to vote in the upcoming human elections. It's important to have a say in our government.
You're right. I may not be cut out for politics, but I can certainly support the democratic process by oinking loudly from the sidelines. Or maybe, just maybe, I'll share some hot sauce with those who cast their votes.
That's the spirit. Let's encourage everyone to exercise their right to vote, even if they don't have the same taste for hot sauce as you do. But we heard in the distance equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted to all. The states set the rules about who got to vote, and your gender, your race, and your wealth were of note. White men with property went to the polls, but the rest of the people were left off the rolls. The dream of democracy wasn't yet true. There were changes to make. There was work still to do. But we heard growing clear equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted to all. The rules about wealth were the first things to go. As more were enfranchised, their voices could grow. And a small group of voices was raising the fact that enslavement was wrong, an unspeakable act. Good people stood up for the truth that they knew. Abolition and suffrage were long overdue. We heard even louder equality's call. A right isn't right until it's granted to all. There was a war in our nation and slavery ended. Amendments were added, the franchise extended. Suffrage is a significant topic. It's about everyone having the right to vote, regardless of their gender, race, or other factors. We pigs might not get to vote, but we support everyone who can exercise their right to suffrage. That's great to hear, Acorn. It's essential for a healthy democracy. By the way, do you think hot sauce should have its own suffrage? Hot sauce lovers unite for the right to choose our level of heat. Maybe we should start a hot sauce suffrage movement. That would be one fiery campaign, Acorn. But let's stick to human suffrage for now and make sure everyone gets a fair chance to have their voices heard. Agreed. Let's keep the conversation sizzling, but not too spicy for everyone to participate in. We'll save the hot sauce revolution for another day. Now more men could vote, at least so the law said, yet denial through taxes and tests was widespread, and the voices of women were mostly omitted. In only some states was their voting permitted. But nothing could muffle equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted to all. Suffragists didn't give up on the fight, and the 19th Amendment gave women the right. But voters of color still met with oppression. Their voting was hindered by brutal suppression. So we passed legislation to make voting fair, to extend and protect voters' rights everywhere. We heard it, we felt it, equality's call. A right isn't right till it's granted to all. The journey's not over, the work hasn't ended. Democracy's dream must be constantly tended. But where we are now is a debt that we owe to the work of more people than ever will know. And each time we vote, we acknowledge the past. We honor our rights to ensure they will last. For to vote is to answer equality's call, and each time we vote with them all.
I gotta know, what was it like the first time you voted?
Well, it was quite an experience. You see, I felt like a real grown-up that day. I went to the polling station, stood in line, and got my ballot. It was a big moment for me. I carefully marked my choices and dropped it in the box. Felt like I was really making a difference.
I once participated in a Who's Got the Spiciest Hot Sauce competition. Talk about confidence. It was hot, Adam, hotter than a summer's day. I strutted in knowing I had this, and boy did I devour those fiery sauces like a pro.
That's quite a unique first-time voting story. You sure do have confidence, whether it's in the voting booth or hot sauce competition. So did you win?
I sure did. I was the spiciest pig in town that day. But let me tell you, I also learned that voting can be as exciting and important as a hot sauce contest. It's about making your voice heard and influencing the future.
Voting is a way for us to participate in our community and country, and it's a big responsibility. It's good to have confidence, just like you, but it's also essential to be informed and make choices that reflect our values and beliefs.
Wise words.
And if you'd like to give a vote of confidence to us, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'm Adam.
And I'm Acorn.
And this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way. Voting-related amendments and legislation. The U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1788, is our nation's framework and fundamental law. As originally written, it did not establish voting rights. It allowed states to determine who is eligible to vote. Since then, constitutional amendments and federal laws have been passed to extend citizenship and voting rights and to protect those rights from being violated. Some key amendments and laws include 15th Amendment, ratified 1870, granted African American men the right to vote. After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to former slaves, and the 15th Amendment affirmed the right of African American men to vote. However, after passage of the 15th Amendment, some states enacted laws that created discriminatory barriers to voting, such as literacy tests and poll taxes. Jim Crow laws and intimidation tactics, including violence, suppressed black voting, especially in southern states. 19th Amendment, ratified 1920, granted women the right to vote. At the time the 19th Amendment was ratified, many Americans, including Native Americans and Asian Americans, were prevented from becoming citizens. Only women who were citizens gained the right to vote when the 19th Amendment went into effect. Only those with access to the polls were able to cast votes. The Indian Citizenship Act, 1924, granted citizenship to Native Americans. Though this act granted Native American U.S. citizenship, laws in some states continued to prevent Native Americans from voting. Native Americans did not gain voting rights in all states until 1957. The Chinese Exclusion Repeal Act, 1943, granted citizenship to some Chinese immigrants, and the Immigration and Nationality Act, 1952, ended Asian American citizenship restrictions. Prior to these acts, most Asian Americans had been prevented from becoming U.S. citizens by the Naturalization Act of 1790 and the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Unable to become citizens, they were also unable to vote. 23rd Amendment, ratified 1961, gave residents of Washington, D.C. the right to vote for presidents and vice president. The representation of citizens living in the District of Columbia is different than the citizens living in the 50 states. The district elects a non-voting delegate to the U.S. House of Representatives, but has no representation in the U.S. Senate. Prior to the 23rd Amendment, D.C. residents were not able to vote in presidential elections. 24th Amendment, ratified 1964, outlawed the poll tax in federal elections. Poll taxes were a fee that had to be paid prior to voting, and they restricted voting for the poor. Poll taxes were levied in some states from the 1890s until the 1960s, and their primary intent was to disenfranchise black voters. The 24th Amendment abolished the poll tax in federal elections. Some states continued to impose poll taxes for state elections until the Supreme Court declared them unconstitutional in 1966. The Voting Rights Act, 1965, outlawed discriminatory voting rules such as literacy tests. An act to enforce the 15th Amendment. The Voting Rights Act prohibited racially discriminatory state and local barriers to voters registering and voting. It also provided for more oversight of state and local voting practices. Although intended to be a temporary or emergency measure, renewals and changes to the Voting Rights Act in 1970, 1975, 1982, 1992, and 2006 extended and improved voting protections, including a requirement for bilingual voting materials in some communities. A Supreme Court decision in 2013, Shelby County v. Holder, struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act. Since then, many states have enacted new barriers to voting, such as voter ID requirements and restrictions on voter registration. 26th Amendment, ratified 1971, lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. In the 1970 extension to the Voting Rights Act, Congress had lowered the voting age to 18, but in that same year, the Supreme Court had ruled that the law was only valid for federal elections. The 26th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote at age 18 in all elections. Voting Accessibility for Elderly and Handicapped Act, 1984, improved physical access to voting. This act required states to ensure that polling places were accessible. Accessibility requirements were furthered by Title 11 of the 1990 Americans with Disability Act, which ensured that people with disabilities have the full and equal opportunity to vote. The National Voter Registration Act, 1993, required states to expand voter registration opportunities. Also known as Motor Voter Act, this act made it easier for Americans to register to vote, including when obtaining or renewing a driver's license. Help America Vote Act, 2002, made reforms to the election system. This act established state voting standards and provided funding to states to improve their voting equipment. This list is not exhaustive. Voting rights have been impacted by other federal laws, by Supreme Court decisions, and by state laws. The effort to protect voting rights is ongoing. To learn more, head over to your library. You can also visit DeborahDiesen.com for further reading suggestions. Did you know the first election to use a voting machine was in 1892, which was 32 years before the first president born in a hospital? Jimmy Carter.